Welcome to DDL, where we discuss everyday topics like current events and or controversial points of view. This is No, I'm Void. First things first, shout out to our sponsor, Candle Time. Head over to the link in the description to purchase a candle today.
Welcome, everyone, to Thursday's episode. So as you know, I record these on Sundays because that's when I have my free time. Now, I previously recorded this one, but realized I didn't turn the mic on, so I had to re-record, and mic is on. But because I record these on Sundays, yesterday was International Women's Day. Now, full transparency, I thought International Women's Day was the second Saturday of every March. I don't know where I got that from, but that's literally what was in my head. So I was thinking it was next Saturday. And it ended up being, it's always March 8th. I learned that. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to use Wikipedia as a source. Let's go ahead and get over to screen share. International Women's Day. I'm going to use, like I said, Wikipedia. I know, don't give me too much crap. I know Wikipedia can be changed at random by random people, but, you know, this one should be fairly accurate. And as I've read through it and not recorded, I can say it actually has some pretty good information in here. So what is International Women's Day? It's celebrated March 8th, commemorating women's fight for equality and liberation along with the women's right movement. International Women's Day gives focus to issues such as gender equality, reproductive rights, and violence and abuse against women. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze. Think elephant. Snuffleupagus. Nope, didn't work. Sometimes I can get myself to not sneeze, but it didn't work. So, gender equality. I don't think this one necessarily needs to be still in the forefront. At least in most Western countries, the equalities between the gender is parallel or they're matching. And in some ways, in some arguments, and I think some of these arguments hold water, women actually have more rights than men now, i.e. selective service in the United States. Women do not have to sign up for that. Men still do. And then, moving into the reproductive rights, women actually have way more power when it comes to the reproductive rights than men do. Men have no say in children anymore these days. Very, very. That's kind of changing. There are states that are doing better jobs of recognizing fathers' rights, but reproductive rights, they use reproductive rights. What they're talking about is abortion, access to abortion, being able to kill their child. And there's an argument, well, as I stated when I first recorded this without having the mic on, there is a wide spectrum on the abortion issue. You have like the zealot religious people that are fervently against it. They think that all life is sacred, life starts at conception. Science actually backs that argument now more than I think most people would like to admit. An individual life starts at conception. Then there's the other side, at birth abortions and then even post-birth abortions in some case, like what's that nugget over in, was it West Virginia, something like that, where he was talking about, make the baby comfortable and then decide what to do with it, that kind of thing. So I'm of the firm stance of it. I'm more like the mid 90s Democrat stance on this, which is safe, legal, and rare. The unfortunate part is there's been such a shift towards using it as a form of birth control and all this. It's just, it frustrates me to the point where it actually makes me want to go and say, if you can't recognize that it shouldn't be something you do all the time, then we should just get rid of it fully. But at the same time, I don't think that's right or fair, so I'm still torn about necessarily where I stand. I do know I would say anything past 9, maybe 10 weeks is pushing it. Before then might be still open for a conversation, but then I always fall back onto when does life actually exist, and do we have a duty to protect life? And yes, we have a duty to protect life. So Now we got to define where life actually begins. Is it at the point of conception? Because if it is, then all abortion is bad. But what constitutes life is a cell that's just dividing, that is left alone will turn into a human, considered a human life. These are profound thoughts that honestly I haven't really have. I'm still working through it. I feel like at some points I get my decision made, and then something strikes me and I'm just like, what, that argument makes sense, and I kind of revisit where I'm at with it. So it's one of those things where it's going to be around for a long time because we have so many different stances on it as people. So nonetheless, this also ties into, reproductive rights. If a woman wants to have an abortion, but the man wants to have the child, that man has no say because the woman has the say. However, on the flip side, this goes back to the inequalities. Men have inequalities versus women in this regard, because if they choose not to, they cannot choose not to financially provide for it. There is no conversation, and there are conversations going on, but there is no mechanism right now. But there's conversations where, like, if a woman can get an abortion without the father's consent, can the male then have a consent to not provide financial assistance if she chooses to keep it and he does not want it, right? So I personally think that argument is stupid, but that's just my perspective on what a man should do. But I also think it's kind of stupid because I don't think we should be having the argument of whether or not the father should be involved in the life of the child. And I also don't think we should be having a conversation of whether or not the mother should be involved in the life of the child. But that's neither here nor there. It's just one of those things where I said it's just a mess of a issue that we don't really have a firm grasp on as a society. And you can see just in one individual, myself, where there's so much different things you have to take into account. Like, how can you actually regulate this? How can you actually have a law or anything around? It's crazy. The one thing I do really like is the violence and abuse against women. Violence and abuse against women is a great topic that I'm glad that they have in there. It is interesting that as a society we don't talk about abuse as much as we should. It doesn't seem that way, I should say. To me, my perception of it is the conversation is not necessarily there. I've been diving into a lot more research into different types of abuse, into different types of cheating, all these things, like all the relationship stuff. I've been diving into it quite heavily and trying to form a more concrete belief system. But it's interesting. So this was spurred by the Universal Female Suffrage Movement. International Women's Day originated from the labor movement in Europe and North America during the early 20th century. So I skipped this part before just because it starts talking about the history. But International Women's Day is a public holiday in several countries. The UN observes the holiday in connection with a particular issue, campaign, and theme in women's rights. So the origins. So the earliest reported Women's Day event, called Women's Day, was held on February 28th of 1909 in New York City. What I found interesting is that it was organized by the Socialist Party of America. I shouldn't be too shocked because the Socialist Party does have this. As much as I don't like socialism, there is some things to be said about the socialist parties, which is they're very good at activism and they're very good at creating a coalition to address issues. And that's one thing I do like about the socialist system is they do bring together individuals in order to get a movement started. Whereas the right or, conservatives, they tend to be more individualistic and you should figure it out and handle it on your own. I don't think having an individualistic look is a great thing, but I also don't feel that a collective only system is a great thing either. You have to have a mixture of the two. So it's just like the Democrats and Republicans in the American political system. both have to be around to actually function appropriately, and they have to have a meaningful conversation in order to actually facilitate movement forward for the country. You know, if we're just heavily Democrat, then we end up doing what we did the last 4 years under Biden, which is destroy the nation. And then if we're heavily Republican, we're going to get stagnant in old beliefs and not take account of the new technological changes, the new societal changes, stuff like that. So you have to have a mesh of the two, and they have to be willing to work together and come up with some sort of compromise. There have been claims that the day was commemorating a protest by a woman workers' garment in New York on March 8th of 1857, but researchers have described this as a myth. That's interesting. So you can go and look up the references that they have cited there as to what that's talking about. August 1910, an International Socialist Women's Conference was organized ahead of the general meeting of the Socialist Second International in Copenhagen, Denmark, inspired in part by the American Socialist German delegates Carla Zentken, Kate Dunker, and Paula Theed, and others proposed the establishment of the annual Women's Day, although no date was specified. The 100 delegates representing 17 countries agreed that the idea as a strategy to promote equal rights, including women's suffrage. Interesting. The following year, on March 19th, 1911, the first International Women's Day was marked by over 1 million people in Austria-Hungary, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland. In Austria-Hungary alone, there were 300 demonstrations with women parading on the Ringstrasse in Vienna, carrying banners honoring the martyrs of the Paris Commune. And across Europe, women demanded the right to vote and hold public office in protest against employment sex discrimination. International Women's Day initially had no set date, although it was generally celebrated in late February or early March. Americans continued to observe Women's Day on the last Sunday in February, while Russia observed International Women's Day for the first time in 1913 on the last Saturday in February. In 1914, International Women's Day was held on March 8th for the first time in Germany, possibly because the date was a Sunday. As elsewhere, Germany's observance was dedicated to women's right to vote, which German women did not win until 1918. Concurrently, there was a march in London in support of women's suffrage, during which Sylvia Pankhurst was arrested in front of Charing Cross Station on her way to speak in Trafalgar Square. The Russian Revolution in the communist countries in March 8th of 1917 in Petrograd. While women textile workers began a demonstration that eventually engulfed the whole city, demanding bread and peace and end to World War I, to food shortages, and to Tsarism. This marked the beginning of the February Revolution, which, alongside the October Revolution, made up the Russian Revolution. Revolutionary leader Lenin Trotsky wrote, 23rd February was International Women's Day, and meetings and actions were foreseen, but we did not imagine that this Women's Day would inaugurate the revolution. Revolutionary actions were foreseen, but without a date. But in the morning, despite the orders to the contrary, textile workers left their work in several factories and sent delegates to ask for the support of the strike, which led to mass strike. All went out into the streets. 7 days later, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, and the provisional government granted women right to vote. After the Russian Revolution, I'm sorry, I just had a weird thought, but I'm not going to get into it. After the Russian Revolution, Bolsheviks began to celebrate the International Women's Day on March 8th, as it marked the beginning of the revolutionary changes in 1917 in Russia. However, it was not officially declared as such for some time, right? So that finishes off the Russian history on it. Other countries, they talk about all their fun jazz. Second wave feminism, adoption by the United Nations. So there's a lot of history and background on this. And if you get a chance, look into it. It's very interesting. And it's been around since 1909. So that's dang near 120 years now. 126 years now? 126. Interesting. Oh, let's see. If we're going to talk International Women's Day, I learned this yesterday when I was looking stuff up. There is an International Men's Day. I didn't know this. Not going to lie, did not know this. So International Men's Day is a global awareness day for many issues that men face, including abuse, homelessness, suicide, and violence, celebrated annually on November 19th. So it's I like the fact that it includes abuse as well. And if you ever do research and look into the stats on abuse and reported versus non-reported, and you start totalizing it all up, there's a very interesting trend that kind of arises, which is the most likely relationships to be abusive are same-sex female relationships. The least likely are same-sex male relationships, and then heterosexual relationships are right in the middle. And if you dive into the heterosexual relationships and who is the abuser and who's the abusee, you come to find out that most relationships, there is a percentage of those relationships where both parties are abusive. There's a larger portion where just the female is abusive, and then there's a smaller percentage, a little bit larger than the both parties, where men are the abusers. It's very interesting stuff to look into and kind of to read and figure out what's going on. But so abuse is definitely something men face. Homelessness. Yes, statistically speaking, men are more than likely the ones that are going to be homeless. There's a reason for that. Ending oneself is at top of the list. That's really prevalent in America these days. There's not much drive or purpose being laid out for men, and it's causing issues. Violence. Most men are the recipients of violence, and yes, most men are the perpetrators of violence. Yes, that's not denying that in any way, shape, or form. However, most violence is from a man is directed towards another man. And it's celebrated on November 19th. Makes sense. I think that's one reason why the No Shave November, all that fun jazz for the men's kind of things that they do in November. I think that makes sense that, November 19th is in there, right? So it's also an occasion to celebrate boys' and men's lives, achievements, contributions, in particular, their contributions to their nation, union, society, community, family, marriage, and childcare. So this is the first thing I noticed. 1992. That was the first thing I noticed. It's 23 years old. The 23rd is coming up this year. Very different. Makes me wonder what and why it didn't occur until the 90s. Have some thoughts. Don't know if they're true. I got to look into it and do a little more research, but it kind of makes sense that you wouldn't have it until the societal the societal changes happened, where women started overtaking more of a prominent role in education, started taking more of a prominent role in the workforce and politics and stuff like that, where now all of a sudden men are like, okay, well, we need to recognize and promote ourselves as well, because before then men were typically the ones in charge. So which is really interesting, that it took a societal change in order to create whatever. It makes sense to me in that facet. I have no idea if that's accurate. I need to do some research on that and figure out if that's actually, how that sprung up into play. But so Thomas Oster, the project of International Men's, was conceived 1 year earlier on the 8th of February of 1991. The project was reinitialized in 1999 in Trinidad and Tobago. The longest running celebration of International Men's Day is in Malta, where events have occurred since February 7th of 1994. As Malta was the only country that observed the February date of the celebrating men, their contribution to the society, the Maltese AMR Committee voted in 2009 to shift the date to IMD, the International Men's Day, to 19th of November. Jerome T. Luxing, who revived the event, chose 19th of November to honor his father's birthday and also celebrate how on that date in 1989, Trinidad and Tobago's football team had united the country. Just so you know, Americans, I'm sure you're watching this wondering what football team. No, soccer team. I am being stereotypical in saying that Americans think of football as American football, and everyone else uses football as soccer. So just FYI. And I know some of you guys know that, so I'm sorry. Apologize if you guys already knew that. They united their country with the endeavors to qualify for the World Cup. He has promoted International Men's Day as not just a gender day, but a day where all issues affecting men, boys can be addressed. He has said that the IMD and its grassroots activists, they are striving for gender equality and patiently attempt to remove the negative images and stigma associated with men in our society. And there are a lot of negative stigmas associated, images associated with men. It makes me think of the bear. You remember, what was it, a year ago or so, where there were, what's safer to be around, the bear or the man, and women are picking the bear, and this is like that. That is such a leap to think that you're more safe with a wild animal than a man. Like that's how much stigma there is against men in our society today. That men are just these violent, evil creatures that are going to harm you more than a hungry bear will. Yeah. So 100% agree that there are a lot of negative images and stigmas associated with us. So unlike the International Women's Day, International Men's Day is not officially recognized by the United Nations. Another interesting fact. That doesn't actually surprise me. Let's see. Calls for International Men's Day have been noted since at least the 1960s, when many men were reported to have been agitating privately to make 23rd February International Men's Day, the equivalent of 8th of March, which is International Women's Day. In the Soviet Union, this day was the Red Army and Navy Day since 1922, which in 2002 was renamed to Defender of the Fatherland Day. The date was informally viewed as a male counterpart to Women's Day in some territories of the Union. However, due to the day's limited focus to historical events, some countries of the former Union have moved to adopt the more male-specific 19th November as International Men's Day, including Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Russia, and Georgia. So this is interesting. In 1968, a journalist named John Harris wrote an editorial in the Salina Journal highlighting lack of balance in the Soviet system, which promoted the International Women's Day for the female workers without promoting a corresponding day for male workers. Harris stated that although he did not begrudge Soviet women their March Day of glory, its resulting gender inequality clearly exhibited a serious flaw in the communist system. There are many flaws in the communist system. The fact that he pointed this one out is actually kind of hilarious, but this is not just in the communist system alone. It's everywhere. There is inequality among the genders, and you can actually see it in the fact that the UN recognizes Women's Day, but they don't recognize Men's Day. That's not to cry or whatever. It's just pointing out facts of the world, right? There is inequality. Women's equality has gotten such to the point where they are equal to men, and now they have actually usurped and started getting preferential treatment over men. And what I mean by that is there are certain facets that men do not have the same rights that women do. We've discussed those earlier. This is just another point that he's bringing up. This was back in '68. He was pointing it out. Where did I leave off? Which makes much more of the equal rights it's given the sexes, but as it turns out, the women are much more equal than the men. Yep. Harris stated that while the men toiled along in their grooves doing what their government and women folk tell them to do, there was no day when males are recognized for their service, leading Harris to conclude that this strikes me as unwarranted discrimination and rank injustice. And I love that line because that actually points out and highlights affirmative action in DIE in American and Western cultures. Affirmative action, obviously, in America, but DIE in Western cultures. It is unwarranted discrimination and rank injustice. Plain and simple. That's what those two programs do. I know I've heard arguments where DIE is warranted because of X, Y, and Z. The simple fact is any program that violates the 1964 Civil Rights Act in America is not good. People should be judged by the content of their character. Martin Luther King. I love Martin Luther King's thought patterns on a lot of things. And his I Had a Dream speech is one of the most profound speeches that I have ever heard in my life. That he had a dream that his children would be judged upon the content of their character, not the color of their skin. MLK was ahead of his time. The guy thought perfectly, in my opinion. I thought he thought perfectly in this regard. Skin color, something no one has any control over, aside from Michael Jackson, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But no one has control over their skin tone. They have no control over what culture they were brought up in, what ethnicity, what their skin looks like, what their background is, who their parents are. No one has control over any of that. So the simple fact that people want to weigh in that is a deciding factor of whether or not a person is good, bad, smart, dumb, qualified, unqualified, makes absolutely no sense to me. And the simple fact that you want to use DIE in order to say your stereotypical traits of this race makes you less qualified here, and your stereotypical traits here make you more qualified here, it's absolutely nuts. It's absolutely insane. It makes no sense to me. The anti-racist is racist. Anytime you are bringing up skin color or tone or any of that stuff to justify being anti-racist, you're using race as a way to justify it. You are, by definition, racist. Oh, sorry. I'm getting off on tangents. So similar questions about the inequity of observing Women's Day without a corresponding Men's Day occurred in media publications from the 1960s through the 1990s, at which time the first attempts at inaugurating International Men's Day were recorded. Again, this just goes back to show you that the inequality between the sexes is prevalent, or it has gone back in ways. Because let's face it, there are things that men can do that women can't do. And let's face it, there's things women can do that men cannot do. Or I shouldn't say can and can't do. There's only one thing I can think of that's an absolute barrier between the two. Men cannot have babies. Women can have babies. Women are much more important, much more valuable in propagating the next generation in the society than men are. Yes, you need men in order to impregnate the women. However, women are the ones that create the next generation. Plain and simple. That's the only one that there's a hard line of can and can't do. Other than that, there is a generality of things that women can do or are better at and things that they are worse at. Same with men. There's things that they are more likely to be good at and less likely to be good at. The part that gets me about the equality between the sexes is we're not looking for equity. There is no such thing as equity between the sexes. We are not the same. Because we are not the same, we have different strengths, we have different weaknesses. The strengths that men have complement the weaknesses women have. The weaknesses men have are complemented by the strengths that women have, right? So take eyesight. Eyesight's actually kind of a really interesting one. If you ever look at the eyes between the sexes, women's eyes tend to see more vivid colors and are great at at finding things like close up, whereas men are not nearly the color spectrum is not nearly as profound, and we have better long distance vision. And if you actually look back, and this makes sense, I'm not going to get into the evolution versus creatism debate. I mean, that's an interesting debate, but there are some things that do make sense. As we grow, as we move through the timeline, I'm trying to avoid having to say as we evolve, because it's not evolution, it's traits, it's survival traits, right? Men that were able to go out and hunt and see things moving at distance and had stamina in order to run down their prey, they survived. Women, they were more of the foragers, right? The men were typically the hunters. Women were typically the foragers. So it makes sense that men can see movement, animal movement, and things off in the distance, whereas women do not have as good of a perception as that as men do. Whereas women have much more profound sense of sight when it comes to things up close. Like, this is why I always think it's hilarious. Even my 12-year-old daughter is laughs at me because I'll be looking in the fridge for something and it's literally sitting right in front of my face. And I'm like, hey, have you seen this? And she walks up and grabs it and it's literally right in front of my face. It's there are things that we have, traits that we have between the sexes that are passed down because they're advantages for survival. Um, where I think a lot of the problem comes in today is the fact that most people, especially people living in larger cities, don't understand where food comes from, don't understand the history of the humans. They live in these concrete jungles that where they've never really seen a farm. They've never had to go and see like how corn is grown or how wheat's grown or where their meat comes from, stuff like this. And it's kind of sad that we don't have that level of understanding, because if we had that level of understanding, then there wouldn't be such a big push, I believe, between the sexes, right? Because we're like I said, we're not the same. We're meant to complement each other. The strengths of one make up the weaknesses of the other, and vice versa. Women are more tend to be more sociable. Again, these are just generalities. These are not speaking for every male or for every female. Obviously, there are some females that are going to be excel beyond men at like firefighting, right? Are there a large percentage of them? Probably not. But then again, there's going to be men that excel at therapy or something like that. That would be typically you would ascribe a female to do, because females are better at social cues. They're better at a social settings than men typically are, right? But that doesn't just because that's a generality doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions. We're adults. We know this. Oh, so it is interesting that we keep bringing up the equity portion of between the sexes, and we should stop trying to make it equitable. We should try keeping it equal, meaning that you have the same opportunities. Whether or not you succeed at those is on you, right? But that's, again, I'm more of a merit-based person than a just because 51% of the population is female, we have to be represented by 51% in every industry. That doesn't make sense to me. Oil rig workers, I don't see why we have to have 51% workers or 50% of the workers being female, right? To me, that doesn't make sense. One is, is there 50% of the female population or is there enough of the population of females that are interested in oil work? If there are, great, cool, go after it. But I don't think that you're going to get to an equal 50-50. It's not something I believe that they're going to be interested in. Women tend to focus on social interactions, why daycare workers are typically female, why school teachers are typically female, why nurses or doctors are typically female. The fields that involve community and family typically are dominated by women. Makes sense because of the biological traits. Dangerous jobs such as oil field workers or welders or stuff like that, those are typically dominated by men. Not because women can't do it, but because men are interested in that kind of thing. That doesn't mean there's not women that are interested in that thing. That just means that on a whole, you are going to see men gravitate towards that more than females. And there's nothing wrong with that. We don't have to have it equitable. We just have to recognize that there are differences and be understanding and allow people to pursue what they want to pursue. Oh, sorry. Got off on a tangent again. So yeah, unwarranted discrimination and rank injustice. Yep, DIE. That is 100% unwarranted discrimination and rank injustice. Some other questions about the inequality of observing Women's Days without a corresponding Men's Day occurred in the media publications from the 1960s and 1990s. Oh, I already read that. I'm sorry. Early 1990s, organizations in the U.S., Australia, and Malta held small events in February at the invitation of Thomas Oster, who directed the Missouri Center of Men's Studies at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He promoted it for 93 and 94, But his following attempt in 95 was poorly attended and he ceased plans to continue the event in the subsequent years. Australia also ceased to observe the event until they re-established it on November 19th of 2003, whilst the Maltese Association for Men's Rights continued to be the only country that continued to observe the event each year in February. Formally being the only country still observing the original February date, the Maltese Committee voted in 2009 to observe the 19th of November in order to synchronize with the rest of the world. Although International Men's and Women's Days are considered to be gender-focused events, they are not ideologically mirror images because they highlight issues that are considered unique to men or to women. The history of IMD primarily focuses or concerns celebrating issues that are considered unique to the experiences of men and boys, along with the emphasis on positive role models, which is especially deemed necessary in a social context, which is often fascinated with images of males behaving badly. In highlighting positive male role models, IMD attempts to show that males of all ages respond much more energetically to positive role models than they do negative stereotyping. 100% true. So, speaking of role models, all kids, all boys, girls have role models. What's interesting is, like, I have 3 children, almost 15, 12, and 6, and it's interesting to see who they follow or who they strive to be or what interests them, right? So my oldest, Andrew Tate, I know he's a topic of concern, and the research I've done into it, I'm not a Tate fan, but I'm also not opposed to Tate. I think he is on balance, he's more of a positive than a negative role model. Giving young boys a dream of being physically fit, of working on education, of being sound business mind. These are positives. There are some things I dislike about Tate, but that's neither here nor there. It's his personal thoughts that he shares. Don't necessarily agree with, but it is what it is. But it is interesting to see how my son, who is very interested in athletics, he was very interested in history, is very smart, loves doing research and learning things. Like I said, he's 14, almost 15 years old, and the kid is smarter than some 40-year-olds I know. And that comes from conversations with me, that comes from research on the internet, that comes from reading books. It comes from a lot of different avenues. But, he has role models that are teaching him proper lifting techniques, exercise routines, helping him get better at wrestling and stuff like that, right? Learning about like ancient Roman history, sound business practices, the pitfalls of communism, the pitfalls of fascism, how fascism and communism, are, how they function and why they gained popularity in the 1900s or the 1900s. There we go. Sorry, 1900s. Yeah. Sorry. Excuse me. My little guy, he's 6, so he's still in the superhero mode. So his role models are Batman, Spider-Man, Thor, Iron Man. He loves that kind of stuff. For Steve from Minecraft, he's still in that age where it's more fantasy-based role models. Which those role models, those ones have a lot of good qualities about them, right? There's a reason why those characters are popular. They're indelible. Let's see. My daughter, interestingly enough, it's very interesting to see my 2 boys. Their more role models are based on male role models, whereas my daughter's role models are more based on female role models with a little splattering of male role models thrown in there. But her interests, her people that she likes to watch and kind of form over are actually women that are promoting strong family values, things like that, which is really interesting. My daughter has a very traditional outlook on life, which she wants to be a mother. She wants to, do a daycare, that she's 12 years old and she's already kind of defined what her purpose in life is. She wants to start a relationship. She wants to be committed to that person, and she wants to have a family with that person, which is interesting. Well, not interesting. It's very commendable that she kind of already understands that at 12 where she wants to go. So trying to help her set standards for what's acceptable in how she's treated in that relationship, set standards on how she should treat her partner in that relationship. Those are things that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to also impart some of that stuff onto my sons. It's much easier to do it with girls than it is with boys in that regard. I'm learning, or at least that's my personal experience. Might be different for other people. But yeah, so role models are very important for kids to have, and even grown people. I have role models that I look up to. I still look up to my dad in a lot of ways. There's some things I dislike quite a bit about my father, but there's some things that I've come to learn that are very good to have. Yeah. So let's look at the 6 pillars of International Men's Day. So 1, to promote positive male role models. Not just movie stars or sportsmen, but everyday working class men who are living decent, honest lives. And I just said that my son is more on the internet looking at those. But, those people, not all of them are Andrew Tate. There are some, who was it that he was watching that's really interesting? Oh, I fail to remember his name, but he's a welder. Yeah, he just has videos on welding, and my son thinks it's absolutely cool what you can do with welding. So number 2, to celebrate men's positive contributions to society, community, family, marriage, childcare, and the environment. Now that's something that, I'm guilty of it. I failed to live up to some of the standards that I wish I had lived up to when it comes to contributing to society. Community, family, marriage, childcare, and environment. We're all human. We all make mistakes, but we need to focus on some of the positive things that people do that definitely encourage the next generation to be better. Number 3 is to focus on men's health and well-being, social, emotional, physical, and spiritual. I love that pillar. Men do not spend enough time focusing on their health and well-being, and especially the emotional well-being. We like to bottle things up. We're taught to internalize and bottle things up, and then we have emotions, right? So one of the biggest things I hate is the stereotype that men don't have emotions. It's just men typically express their emotions through one emotion, and that's usually anger. I think this ties back into number 2 and number 1, which is trying to find a healthy outlet to express your emotions in a non-aggressive way. The bad part about that is when you do, as a man, as you do express your emotions in a healthy way, you tend to be ostracized. And it's typically not by other men. Other men typically understand exactly what the heck they're talking about. It's typically done by the women that are close to you. They don't tend to have the same understanding. You're viewed as vulnerable and you're viewed as weak, and you kind of lose standing. So most men are taught you don't share your emotions, especially with women. And if you do need to share your emotions, you're supposed to do it with a group of men. That's one of the classic or hallmark things that the red pill nation likes to push out. And in some ways it makes sense, and in some ways it doesn't, because all it does is further that stereotype that men don't have emotions, right? And that's just not true. I think men can have emotions and express those to the females close to them. Your partner, your mom, your sisters. Your mom is going to love you unconditionally. That's the only unconditional love that you're going to... Well, no, that's not true. Your mom and your children are the only unconditional people that are going to love you. Everyone else, it's usually a conditional love. So expressing yourself as a man is somewhat hard. And I know I'm diving more into the man side than the international women's side, but that's just because I am a man. I understand the talking points a lot better than I do the international women's side, especially since the international women's side was all about gaining equality and promoting reproductive rights and abuse and violence in the relationship. The core tenet is equality among the sexes, which has been met. So there's a lot more in being addressed on the men's day than there is on the women's day in this regard. So not trying to minimize theirs. They need to have the day to celebrate what they've accomplished and everything. 100% agree with that. Don't get it twisted that I'm trying to knock it in any way, shape, or form. I'm not. Number 4, to highlight discrimination against men in areas of social service, social attitudes and expectations, and law. That's a good one. And I've kind of hit on this a little bit. Social services, men don't have this, I shouldn't say they don't have the same access. They do have the same access, but they tend to be shunned a lot more when it comes to needing assistance from social services. Social attitudes. Men are viewed as aggressive. I mean, the bear thing that went around a year and a half ago or whatever it was, a prime example of that. Social attitudes towards men is we are just violent creatures. And expectations. I just said it just a minute ago. Men are provided love on conditionality other than their children and their mom. So there's social expectations that men have to hit. And law. Excuse me, I'm still fighting off a little bit of a cold. Which is actually really interesting, the law one, because men don't have the, specifically in the United States, I live in the States, the laws for child custody after divorce or what have you, they favor the female. They favor the mother much more than they favor the father, which the studies show that if you really care about the betterment of the child, then you're much better off with actually placing them with the father than you are with the mother. And the reason I say that is the studies have shown that there is a correlation between incarceration, there's a correlation between poverty, there's a correlation between education, there's a correlation among a few pillars that show that the best outcome for a child to, not get put in jail, to graduate high school, to be financially successful is coming from a two-parent household. The next best option with like 2% less is actually being in a single father household. And then it's only, I want to say, it's been a while since I've read these stats, so I want to say it's only like a 56% chance that the child will graduate high school, not have problems with the law, be financially successful, and have children after all these are completed, is from a single mother household. And that's not knocking women. That's just ties back into the differences between men and women. We're complementary to each other. Why is the most successful child rearing done between a mother and a father in the same household? Because they're complementary of each other. It also makes sense as to if you lose the parents, that a child would be more successful living with a father on its own actually does make sense. And that is for the simple fact that fathers' roles are to create an understanding of how to operate inside reality, to construct the confines of how you should behave in society, how to go along to get along, basically. Whereas a mother's role is to nurture and to encourage, right? So not saying that's not important. It definitely is important. But if you don't have the limiting factors on the reality of life, of the consequences that you face for doing things, for behaving certain ways, then you will not I shouldn't say you will not. You will have a harder time operating inside society. To me, that makes a lot of sense. The studies show that. I think it's an interesting topic. You should definitely go and read up on that stuff. So, 5, to improve gender relations and promote gender equality. So that's actually interesting, because I don't consider myself a feminist by any stretch of the imagination. I think feminism has been corrupted to the point where it's no longer about equality. It's no longer about you having the same opportunities or men and women having the same opportunities. It is now about the privileges women can have at the expense of men. That's what it seems like to me. That's how I interpret it, mainly because if you take a look in America, women don't have to sign up for selective service, yet they get awarded all the benefits of, because it used to be back in the day in America where you would only be allowed to vote if you were a man because you had civic duty that you were tied to, i.e., signing up for the draft. They got rid of that. Women wanted the right to vote. They got the right to vote, but they did not want to have to do the selective service. So they are not, so that's, they got the equality without the equality, if that makes any sense. They got the benefit without the sacrifice. Same when it comes to child rights. Men do not have the same child rights, right? So there's, I'm not a fan of feminism because it feels like feminism is not pushing equal opportunity anymore. It feels like they're pushing women are superior to men. And to me, that's not okay because I have a viewpoint of we're complementary. There's strengths and weaknesses women have. There's strengths and weaknesses men have. We complement each other, and we need to stop trying to say one sex is better than the other because no sex is better than the other. Men are not better because they're men. Women are not better because they're women. We are people. We have different strengths and different weaknesses. We complement each other. So I'm not for the feminist movement, and I would not be for a masculine movement either. I am for promoting femininity in women. I'm also for promoting masculinity in men. But yeah, so there you go on that one. I do like how they're saying improve gender relations. We definitely need to improve gender relations. And I think one of the best ways to start doing that is understanding that there is a difference between the sexes, and recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of each gender. Right. So yeah. To create a safer, better world where people can be safe and grow to reach their full potential. 100%. I agree with that 100%. And I think that ties back into the previous 5. You can't get to that point without having those previous 5. 100%. So these are the yearly themes. Not going to go into that. Not going to go into the different regions that they do it. But yeah, lots of interesting stuff here. Wow, there's a bunch. So I will say it's very interesting that between the sexes, or between the two articles, the Women's Day and the Men's Day. Men's Day keeps referencing back to the Women's Day, and I think that keeps in line with their pillar number 5, which is showing the gender equality. Whereas the Women's Day, they didn't even talk about the Men's Day. Very interesting. Kind of telling to me, though, too. I'm a little, like I said, I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm jaded or I'm upset with it. I think that it's just like any other movement. You get to the point, you have a goal of what you want to do, and then you get to that point, and now you start pushing and actually destroying what you were trying to accomplish. I think DIE did that. I think the feminist movement did that. There was definitely some things that you can do to promote and get people working together. But once you start getting to the point where you've reached your goal and then you start saying, oh no, I need these extra things, then you start creating problems on the flip side. And I think we've started hitting that point back in the, probably 80s, where that started flipping and issues started cropping up from the reverse, right? That's, and it goes back, that doesn't, how to say this? That doesn't mean that men are better than women. That doesn't mean women are better than men. That doesn't mean that a certain race is better than a different race. That doesn't mean that this race is better than that race. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. What it means is we are people. As individuals, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. As a group, the way you were raised, the way where you were from, these things tie into it. The best that I can hope for, the best that I want to do, and what I try instilling in my children is everyone deserves an opportunity to be treated with respect, to be given the chance to do what they want to do, to play to their strengths, to achieve the best life, to fulfill their purpose as they want to. But once you start segregating, dividing people based on gender, based on race, whatever, you start alienating people and whatnot. And then once you start ignoring biological truths, like this is interesting. There was a medical study. I think it was a medical study out of UK that actually started looking at fast twitch muscles in the between men, women, and then even started looking at the different races. And one reason why this actually makes a lot of sense as the reason why, like, there's a stereotype that black athletes can run faster. And if you look at the study, you actually find out that the fast twitch muscle fibers, they have more density of that, which makes sense, which is why they're really great at sprinting, stuff like that. That's not to other them. That's not to anything. That's just a biological difference from where you were raised or your genetics, right? That doesn't mean good, bad, or different. It just means that it is. So it just frustrates me that skin color plays such a big role. It just frustrates me that the difference between men and women plays such a big role in our society. There are fundamental truths, and this is one thing that I've gotten more back into religion, and I'm not practicing. I still consider myself agnostic, and I consider myself agnostic because I'm still trying to learn. But there are fundamental truths across most religions that show, like, the different roles in society, different roles inside family units, different roles inside the community. And it's very interesting to see that historically there were these roles and family units tended to be much stronger. I don't necessarily know if the nuclear family is the best way to go. I do think it makes sense. But at the same time, it doesn't make, it's hard. It's hard to make that claim because the economy definitely can't support a nuclear family in this day and age like it could back in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even before. It's interesting. Sorry. One thing I like about doing this stuff is it makes me go down rabbit holes and makes me start questioning things and reevaluating some of my philosophies, some of my beliefs. And it makes me feel like the conversation hopefully is important to you guys as well and help you guys think about something maybe you didn't think about, or, and then drop something if you have a profound thought, and that way I can, incorporate that into my thought processes as well. We're not isolated beings. We live inside of community. And the community is Earth. And inside Earth, we all have different values and different systems of beliefs. And, it's one reason why I'm not huge on America interventionalism, because the American values are not the same values that, Iraq has, or not the same values that Panama has, and not the same as China has, right? We all have different things going on based on where we're living and how we grew up. So yes, it's important to get influences from other cultures and whatnot, but the interventionalism that America has, we should not be trying to force our beliefs on anyone else. And that's one reason why I'm not against military interference with like Israel and Hamas. There's, oh God, I'm not even going to get into that one because I'll just piss a lot of people off on both sides, because my stance is firmly we shouldn't be involved. We should let people in those areas figure out for themselves how best to deal with it for themselves. Israel has a right to defend itself. Hamas has a right to exist. I'm not disagreeing with either of those statements, but we can't pick winners. We can't pick losers, and us putting our thumb on the scale of justice or interfering in some way, shape, or form, I don't think that's the role America should be playing. I think we can offer to do negotiations and stuff like that, but the Ukraine-Russia stuff, I'm getting really frustrated with that. The simple fact that people are just sitting here calling Putin a dictator and stuff like that, I understand why you are calling him that. But how can you expect to get him to the table, to sit down at the table and come up with a way to stop the killing if you're just going to bash him and hurt him, like hurt his ego and stuff like that? Because all you're doing is telling him, like, we don't think you have a right to do what you're doing, and we want you to be done, and you shouldn't even come to the table because you're just a bad, bad man. Well, sure, what he did was bad, 100%. But he's the one that you need to get to the table in order to stop it from going further. Like, to me, it flabbergasts me that people can't understand that simple concept, that you can't pick a side and alienate and then try figuring out a way to do it. Because basically what you're saying is we're going to support Ukraine. Putin, you're a bad, bad guy. We need to figure out how to do it. Oh, let's just keep giving money to Ukraine and letting them die and fight. And then, oh, why is it keep going on? Why is the death still going on? Oh, because you're not going to him and saying, like, dude, what you did was wrong. Can you get to the table with us and let's figure out how to peacefully end this? What are your demands? What are their demands? Can we come up with a compromise in between? No, yes, okay. Let's figure that out. Otherwise, all you're doing is saying, oh, like, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. Why even fund money to Ukraine at that point? Why don't you just say, hey, let's send the U.S. military in? Because that's basically what you're doing. You're prepping us. You're doing a slow walk towards World War III. Makes no sense to me. Makes absolutely no sense to me. Like, and I was talking with my oldest son I wasn't talking with my oldest son. Who was I talking with? Oh crap, I can't remember who I was talking with, but I remember saying, like, sometimes I feel like I am so dumb because shit just appears things just appear so clear to me that I feel like when I say it, like I'm talking, like I'm doing a like I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm just like, it's just frustrating, I'm not saying Ukraine has to give up and not have a country or whatnot like that. No, that's not what that's saying. What I'm saying is I want the death to stop. How do we get the death to stop? We get the two parties together with a neutral third party, which I don't even know if we can classify ourselves as a neutral third party anymore because of the amount of money that Biden and his administration funneled in there, to negotiate a compromise in some way, shape, or form. Like, hey, you're looking for the Donbass region. You're looking for access to the Red Sea. What are you looking for? Ukraine. How can we get him some satisfaction? How can we get Ukraine some satisfaction? How can we end this in a peaceful way? And I'm sure that's going to come up with some sort of territory loss on Ukraine's part. I would imagine that's going to have to happen, because Russia's probably going to want access to the Red Sea. They're probably going to want their base back that was taken over, right? I get that there's probably that portion. And I get that there's people that are saying, like, no, they're the bad guys. They can't let them have any of that, because that's just going to encourage them 6, 7, 8, and 10 years down the road. Well, hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully there's some way we can get them what they need and then stop the posturing and the encroachment that would make them feel like they have to keep going further. I don't know. I just know you can't have two parties come to a table when you're sitting there saying one isn't even allowed at the table. Makes no sense to me. Do I have the answer on how it should be done? I do not have the answer to that. But I do have the answer of you have to have both parties at the table. You can't alienate one because you think he's a bad Batman. Even if he is a bad Batman, you still can't alienate him like that. My 2 cents on that. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Till next week.
Thank you for watching. Till next time.
Peace.